Vandana, we met, I didn't know you, with the World Resources Institute had their first big meeting on climate and natural resources, and they'd just been given, I don't know, $15 million by the MacArthur. And it was and Vandana was invited along with many other people from around the world, and CNN showed up. And so they began the conference, and everyone started talking about, in the developed countries and the undeveloped countries, what are we going to do about all these things? And about an hour, Vandana, who I did not know, this woman's very, imposing woman, says, wait a minute, we have to stop for a second. You see, in very few generations, what you call the developed world has put the entire biochemistry of the planet in danger because of its practices. You sometimes call the undeveloped world, we've lived in relative sustainability for all that time. So for the rest of this conference, we are going to call the developed world the undeveloped world, the undeveloped world the developed world. I thought that was so, I fell off my chair. I thought it was so phenomenal. And then I went up to Vandana after the conference, and it turned out we were both working on the patenting of life early on. Remember, that's when all the patenting of life was happening.
Yeah.
Patenting of microbes, patenting of animals, and patenting of plants. And we both had this shared passion to somehow stop, because we knew, well, Vandana, you talk about why right now, when we're patenting, we both understood the dangers of patenting.
You and I were the two people at that time who were not only focusing on the technology, but the patenting of life.
The United States Patent Office, for the very first time in 1980, said you can patent life. General Electric can patent the microbes it makes because they're genetically engineered. Then an ex parte here, said, and you can patent genetically engineered plants and later on hybrid plants. And then they said, yes, you corporations, you can also not just patent plants that you engineer, but also hybridize, but also animals. And so since that time, hundreds, now thousands and thousands of bacteria and plants and animals have been patented and owned by corporations, which means they actually, for the first time, corporations could have patent ownership of all life up until the human. And the only reason not the human in the United States is because we have a prohibition on slavery. So corporations owning the entire biota of the world, that was the vision. And at that time, Vandana and I were some of the only two people who were really, really going after it in a major way, both intellectually and also in policy.
Vandana, how did you get involved or curious about the patenting of life by U.S. corporations?
Let me take a step back because, my own background, I'd studied physics, I'd done a PhD in the foundations of quantum theory on a very fancy topic, hidden variables and non-locality in quantum theory. Hidden variables saying you cannot ever find deterministic particles. This will always be uncertain and indeterministic. And it doesn't have only local impact. It is non-local. It is, it has action at a distance. So that was my thesis. But I came back and I just wanted to understand, I said, we have so much science and we are told more science, less poverty. And why does our poverty keep increasing? So I spent 3 years, I said I'd take time off. I had offers in science institutions. So I said, no, I want to understand for 3 years. Why? How science and technology and poverty are linked. They're supposed to be linked positively, but wherever I see a trawler come in, fishermen become poorer. And then as I had anyway been involved in the movement called Chipko, the women coming out to hug the trees. 84 was the year that we basically shattered India and, my own view of the world. It was the year Punjab, where the Green Revolution, which is chemical agriculture introduced in our parts of the underdeveloped world, it was first introduced, imposed on Punjab. And that same year, Bhopal tragedy took place. So 30,000 people died in Punjab. Thousands died, and people are still being born maimed in Bhopal. So that year, I decided to look at what was this thing called the Green Revolution and what had it done to Punjab. So I get called, now I'm suddenly an agriculture expert because I've done a book on agriculture. But I wrote an ecological book, social and ecological impact of what was happening. And I was then invited to a meeting in 1987, organized by Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation. Dag Hammarskjöld was the first Secretary General of the United Nations. And there's a Swedish foundation dedicated to him. So they'd organized this meeting in Geneva and outside Geneva. And they straight away said, we have to do genetic engineering in order to take patents. And we have to have a global law to forbid farmers to have their own seeds and only use GMO and patented seed. And it sounded so wrong, but they were just waiting to run the biotechnology industry. They hadn't done the biotechnology. It was universities that had done the biotechnology. It was venture capital firm, companies. But they were merging, and then they became back again the four giants. I call them the poison cartel. So that's when I realized they were going to go into the international system. And it was a dear friend, Chakravarti Raghavan, who during that period, everyone was looking towards the UN. Oh, they'll do this in the UN. And he said, no, UN is obsolete. The platform now is GATT, which became the World Trade Organization. And this is the beginning of, my following GATT, WTO, intellectual property, patenting, biopiracy, and saving seeds. The more important work was saving seeds. So I always say I'm very, very grateful to these people, because why would I have done this work? Why would I have done the constructive work?
So what I'm hearing is that as you looked into the Green Revolution, which was the introduction of industrial agricultural strategies in sort of the global South, the developed world. Those who are listening were using bunny ears there. What was emerging was this sort of new frontier for the Green Revolution of patenting plants and life. And that for you sort of struck your interest. And the WTO is the global institution that was going to set the rules of the game to protect these patents globally.
And because then the GATT was signed at Marrakesh in 94, that's when many of us who had been working on different elements of globalization got together and formed the International Forum on Globalization, IFG. Jerry Mander took the lead, but all of us were part of it. And through this, we could build global movements. Through this, we could stop Seattle, WTO in Seattle. And one more patent story that I'd like to tell your listeners is, so at that point, Penang was a very important place of more organizing. Mr. Idris, a wonderful man who has passed away last year, he had created a number of institutions. The Consumer Association of Penang, very much like the Center for Food Safety, Sahabat Alam Malaysia, which is the Friends of the Earth, which stopped the logging in Sarawak, and Third World Network. This was revolutionary. So we were in Penang, looking at the TRIPS agreement and looking at line by line. And then we realized, when they're saying countries may exclude, they're actually saying countries must patent. And two things happened, because at that time in India, I had been mobilizing on the patent on neem, because in 94, a patent had been taken on neem, which is a plant that is a natural pest control agent. And I'd started No More Bhopal's plant and neem campaign after Bhopal. 10 years later, I find it's patented. And we created in Penang, I remember this so vividly, the neem team, the group fighting TRIPS and patenting.
So I remember in Hawaii, you guys told me a story of sharing a hotel room on the floor, sleeping on the floor in Cancun. And for some of our listeners, I would imagine that they might not remember this time of global upheaval around the late 90s, early 2000s, where a global movement, of which you both were a part and leaders, came together to confront the institutions of the WTO and the IMF, which, to say succinctly, were mechanisms to open markets and resources to corporate profit, legal, global mechanisms to sort of pave the way for quote unquote globalization. Can you guys tell me a little bit about those protests and sort of how you came together? And like you said, Vandana, how you won in Seattle.
So going back to the World Bank, IMF, and GATT, these were the three institutions created in 1944 44 in Bretton Woods. That's why they call the Bretton Woods Institution. And in the 50th anniversary of Bretton Woods, I had been called for a conference. So I went down to the basement. And the first day cover of this conference said, "Money Men of the World Meet." So 44 is just before the war ended, but our international movements were growing vigorously. In 42, we had told the British quit India. So they knew countries would become independent. And World Bank, IMF, and GATT, which became WTO, were instruments of continuing colonization in a new form. Now, through the financial system and through the trade system. So at that stage, any movement that I would be involved in, planting monoculture eucalyptus, the World Bank financed the Green Revolution, the big dams in India, which was always World Bank money. And they then got us into debt. And then they put structural adjustment, 91. That's where they then try and say, now you must have had GMOs and now you must have multinational companies, etc. How did we organize for Seattle? Actually, we thought it would just be an IFG event and there would be a teach-in, which was the IFG model for spreading awareness. But the information just spread. And we had a very big teach-in, but we had thought about 5,000 people would come. There were about 30,000 people. And I would meet on the road young people, college students, who were holding my book called Biopiracy, which is on patent on life. And they say, I'm here because of this. So, young people were reading all this and putting it all together. And then, of course, the unions put it up. And I remember the march where the Turtles and the Teamsters worked together for one common issue of protecting life, protecting the planet, protecting our work. And this movement was strong, it would have stayed strong. The Commerce Secretary around that time, who then became the World Bank president, wrote a piece in the New York Times and the Herald Tribune saying the anti-globalization movement is a terrorist. So if today the anti-globalization movement has had to go, it has been quiet, and it was because of that one article. But how did we particularly stop? One, we unified. The typical divisions, workers versus environmentalists and all that was all out of the window. And the more important thing was the young people did very Gandhian civil disobedience. They sat in the middle of the streets and they had pipes joining their hands to blockade the traffic. And I said, where did you learn this? And they smiled at me and said, Gandhi. I said, have you been to India? No, we do workshops here. And they taught themselves civil disobedience. But we also had people inside working with governments. So third world governments also walked out of the Seattle Agreement. That's why Seattle was stopped. The WTO in Seattle was stopped because people and the governments who were not sold out to the corporations worked together. And the same thing happened in Cancun. Again, this was about cotton, the big subsidies. Again, Cancun, they could not get it through. So again, WTO failed. It also nearly failed in Hong Kong. And then Pascal Lamy, who became the Director General, he actually said, now WTO is in a cold storage, it's in deep freeze.
I think one of the themes there as well was the idea that WTO and many of these trade agreements were a fundamental threat to any democracy around the world, because they basically said any law you pass in your country that violates our trade rules is void. If we decide that you're protecting, having to do certain nets to catch your tuna because you don't want to kill whales, we think that other countries don't have that law actually is invalid. So it was really a corporate, almost beginning to establish a international corporate judge of all democratic things that were going on in the world. And this would have been continued by TPP. And one of the things I will say, Vandana, and again, much praise to the International Forum of Globalization, where, so many brilliant people, I learned so much being on that board. But I think Cancun, civil society was still going at it against, saying to governments, you can't go along with this. And then between Seattle, when they saw that, and Cancun, something changed that I saw, which was many of these national governments now have been so, inundated with energy from their local civil society. When they came to Cancun, they were already out of the Doha round, which is the round we're talking about. Even they had actually, so we switched from just being sort of, angry at governments to saying, no, governments now were pulling out. And that really was it. That was the nail in the coffin, right, Von? When governments, and of course, we'd gone into Iraq, and a lot wasn't very popular at the time either. And that was it. It was so great to see civil society have that great an influence that government after government was pulling out. And that was the end of the Doha round, cold storage. And it's been a cold storage almost ever since.
And, an interesting thing about Cancun was, they had marked the activists they were going to ban from entering. And my name was on the list and it had been announced. But somehow they didn't stop me. And no one was there to receive me because they thought I was going to be arrested at the airport. And I arrive for these meetings and they think it's a ghost arriving. But, all these very young soldiers had been hired who had no experience. They were young boys and they had so much security. You might remember that this Korean peasant who committed suicide to say, I'm ending my life for you to wake up to the crisis agriculture and farmers are living through because of globalization. And I know for India, see, because of the country we are such an agrarian country, but so diverse, the Himalaya and the rainforests are so different, agriculture is different. So we created agriculture according to regions, bioregions, which were then the states. WTO totally changed that pattern of federal work. And agriculture, without a constitutional discussion, was lifted to the center, which then became a mechanism for enforcing the kind of rules that would undermine. You might have heard or seen the 14 months where the Indian peasants were on the roads blockading Delhi. Well, it was part of the rules of globalization that we had fought all these years. And during the COVID, so much happened during COVID that would never have happened during democratic debate. But during COVID, there was an attempt to pass it, but the farmers did not allow it. And yes, globalization, corporate globalization, is an absolute threat to all democratic structures and all people's freedoms.
I'm wondering if you guys can tell me, you both represent for me activists that deploy many tools in your toolkit. You write, you sort of tell stories, but civil disobedience and direct action are often forgotten. And I know that for both of you, a lot of your foundations were sort of aligning with these movements in the streets and really understanding that people across the world were willing to put their lives on the line to stop the passage of these laws. Like, where do you think civil obedience is today in like an era of social media?
If you are getting your information through either the mainstream media or social media, which are equally fake, you can be confused. But when overnight a law comes telling the Dutch farmers who were forced into having factory farms through the CAP subsidies, who were forced into having chemical agriculture, overnight they're told, now they must shut their farms down and the land will be taken away. And that they'll actually get money if they give up their land, but otherwise they'll just be punished. Well, they're on the streets right now. They're having to do civil disobedience. So when you are hit directly to rob your life and livelihood, the natural process of freedom is people act through direct action.
Yeah, I agree with that. By the way, in the prior discussion, Vanda, we don't want to, when we talk about corporate global, we don't want to let some of our nonprofit corporations off the hook, right? Gordon Conway and the Rockefeller Foundation were behind the Green Revolution. So these nonprofits who are actually acting, and today we have Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is really, with its African work, with its work in Asia. So these nonprofits that have the patina of being nonprofits and being in the public interest are actually some of the leading forces that we have to fight against. So it isn't just for profit.
Of course. So as you said, Rockefeller and Ford were front. The World Bank gave the financing, the US aid gave the conditionalities, but it was Rockefeller and Ford who really pushed the green revolution. And as I've written in my book, Oneness versus 1%, which I did with my son, Karthikeya, whom you have met. And we wanted to understand how come Mr. Gates was determining the agenda of the Paris Climate COP. And then we started to look very quickly at what else he was doing and realized that just like Rockefeller, who was a robber baron, to create a clean image, he created the Rockefeller Foundation. Gates, who was being recognized for having a monopoly and having all kinds of illegal means, now was advised to be like the Rockefeller Foundation and create the Gates Foundation. So we actually have done a book. We brought all the movements together, people working on geoengineering because he's got his finger there. On fake food, he's pushing fake food like mad. On education, on health, on media. So this book is out in the US from Synergetic Press, and it's called Philanthrocapitalism, because that's what it is. It is not philanthropism. It is not giving. It is giving with huge conditionalities in order to create new monopolies and new markets. And he's a big pusher of patenting. He's a big pusher of patenting. You know, the two big treaties that prevented patenting on seed was the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Seed Treaty of FAO. Now, all of them require that there be permission taken. If you want to take seed from a farmer, you have to take their permission. You have to take the permission from the country. Now, he's trying to undermine these laws, and he wants digital sequencing to be outside any norm. So just making a little, like in, the digitals, just like you have the price here. So just to have that for a life form, and that is outside all rules. And he's pushing that in a big way. He also has a company called Editas, and we've written about this in Oneness versus 1%, which is created purely for gene editing patents. So he financed the two scientists who then fought against each other, the scientists in Berkeley, the scientists in Cambridge, and but he has all, he controls the patents. So yes, the foundation, I don't call them NGOs, I don't call them civil society. They are basically corporations with a mask.
I like the term philanthrocapitalism. I'm definitely gonna.
And the thing that they do, which we, like in AGRA, I can't quite remember what that acronym means, but it's basically a Rockefeller and their friends supported. What they do is they raise billions of dollars, and right now it's happening something called AIM for climate that Vilsack and Gates are all about. They raise billions of dollars, and then they buy out countries, researchers, university researchers. They basically go and say, do you want $5 million? You want $20 million? But it's all for GMOs. It's all for robotics. It's all for nano. And that is sort of their strategy. They go in and they just simply use their money to usurp.
And because the billionaire money is so big, it is much bigger than what governments can pay. It is much bigger than the institutions governments run. But, you said you didn't know or you've forgotten what AGRA means. AGRA is. Well, there's an AGRA in India, which is wonder of the world, right? The beautiful Taj Mahal. So this AGRA is not a Taj Mahal.
It's very different.
Yeah? This AGRA is the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa. And it's created jointly by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Gates Foundation. And I remember going to meet the Rockefeller Foundation. I said, you've messed up my country. Now you want to go and mess up Africa? Now Gates is running it. And you're so right. They finance this recent film that's just been made on me. There's a footage. When I've traveled Africa, when the movements wanted me to come and train them on the GMO question and the patent question. And I was in Ghana, where there's a real strong movement. And this woman came into the press conference, started to shout. And she was actually financed by Gates and the biotechnology industry. But Gates has actually even worse direct intervention. He has created something called the Cornell Alliance of Science. And people think this is Cornell University, and it's not. It's basically his propaganda machine. And there's a person called Mark Linus, who he's put there. He's a history graduate, undergraduate. And he's been put there, and as if he's a scientist, Every time, like the GM brinjal failed in Bangladesh, they flame him in, and he writes pieces for New York Times and Newsweek. And of course, because it's all run by money, all this comes. And the failures in the fields of farmers never reach the press. And talking about Agra, the poor farmers of Netherlands are being pushed on the nitrogen question. And look at Mr. Gates. He's saying, I'm standing in front of a fertilizer factory and I'm happier than I look. And he says, I love fertilizer. Now, here are farmers being punished. And here's this man pushing fertilizers because that's what the Agra is, fertilizers and GMs.
Just for our folks that are listening and not watching, Vandana opened. What was that book you opened, Vandana?
The book is called How to Avoid a Climate Disaster. and there's another book he's just done, How to Avoid a Pandemic. But how to avoid a climate disaster, he's already laid out here what is going to happen in the Conference of Parties at Glasgow. For the first time, he talks about net zero, which is the polluters keep polluting, but they grab the resources of the poor as offsets. He's written it right there, net zero. Doesn't mean ending pollution. It isn't absolute zero. This is where he's pushing fertilizers. And because, we have a farm and we don't use tractors because we don't want to use fossil fuels. So, we have the male cows and they are the animal energy, and we have the female and they give us what little they want to give. This is what he's saying. This kind of animal energy, plows and bullocks, should be pushed to extinction. They're primitive. This is the mindset that is creating false solutions and is continuing colonialism in a new way. This is modern day colonialism.
So back to my question. I mean, we see the broader landscape of power today. You have philanthrocapitalism led in this moment by the Gates Foundation. We have global institutions on trade that are pushing policies that are about opening markets across the world for corporate profit. And you have both of you with decades of experience resisting the unchecked movement of this machine and its exploitation of our planet. And I am wondering, so much of our conversations in this podcast have been like, what are we going to do about it? Like, do we need to get into the streets and engage again in real civil disobedience? Like, what does organizing in this moment require?
I always say there's two parts of any movement. One is stopping the bleeding. And that means you stop that factory, you stop that GMO, you stop that coal. You have to stop the bleeding, because otherwise the planet, as we know, is going to go. We're not going to be able to do this incredible creation is threatened. But that's never going to be enough. You have to change the consciousness of what's behind this, the kind of thinking. And when we were in the International Forum on Globalization, there was a group of us there. We called ourselves the Fundies because we were the fundamentalists. Teddy Smith,
and the Realos and the Fundies.
The Realos were the ones who were going to work in the UN and do good stuff. Don't get me wrong. Our beloved late friend Martin Core and others, great. But we were the Fundies because we said they're the very basis of this system is based on false consciousness. Is based on a dysfunctional view of nature as natural resources. Is based on some bizarre idea that the earth and nature is derivative of us instead of us being derivative of nature. It was based on the most fundamental ideas that we could exhaust nature faster than it can regenerate itself. I mean, there are these pathologies that we kill all these insects and fungi and they wouldn't resist. Somehow nature wouldn't bat last. It was really sort of hubris, sort of Enlightenment, industrial age hubris that has led us to believe that we can control something that we cannot. And so the catastrophe we're seeing. So yes, I think we should get in the streets. I'm not sure computers help with that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I'm not crazy about that. But I think unless we also do the work that Vandana has done with her books, and so much to change the consciousness, to really show the pathology of their consciousness and get people to get the narrative that this system is doomed. This system has no future. No future for the soil, no future for seas, no future for people, no future for the planet, no future for species. That is the key. This is a doomed paradigm. It's a dead paradigm walking. It's a zombie paradigm because it's killing us, but it's a dead paradigm walking. And that's, so Vandana, you've written about this so extensively.
Yeah.
So
And I would add a third element to this, because I believe that, like everything else, even our strategies have to be biodiverse. So the third element, which is where I give most of my time, is creating the creative alternative. Yeah. And that's where the partnership with the earth, rather than this animosity and this hubris, that we are part of the earth. And if we are part of the earth, our work is service and care. And we don't have to carry the earth on our shoulders like an atlas. We merely have to take care of her where we are. Take care of that patch of soil. Take care of those little seeds. And out of that is the regeneration. Because the regeneration is not just the human capacity, but the ecological capacity of an amazingly creative earth. And it is a shift in consciousness, but it's the practice that flows from that shift in consciousness. And I think that's already happening. And that's why industry panics, and attacks. I've lived through 20 years of Monsanto attacks. They kill my website. I'm briefing our lawyers on the BT Cotton case, and my whole computer crashes. So I've lived through all of this surveillance control. And yet when I realized when I was threatened, when I sued Monsanto for their illegal entry in India in 1999, I filed a case in the Supreme Court. They tried to threaten me very seriously. And I just made lots of copies of the writ. And I said, if I don't turn up tomorrow, I told friends, I said, you turn up and just hand over this file to the lawyers. And even for seed saving, we have a beautiful seed bank. We have a wonderful farm, a training farm. Out of it has grown an Earth University. And for your listeners who want to know, how do you change things? We offer a course every October. And now that COVID is over, it's a physical course, 1st to 12th of October. We call it Return to Earth. Return to Earth in our consciousness. Return to Earth through our hands. And return to Earth in terms of giving back with gratitude.
You both mentioned being attacked by industry. And I myself have experienced intimidation a little bit in my short career. I'm wondering how you maintained your sense of faith in humanity when you're working against an industry who seems to have no ethics in how it engages with its opposition.
3 very simple reasons. The first is they are not humanity. So don't generalize from their violent actions as if that is humanity. Second of all, they're not even people. A corporation is a fictitious person. It's just a legal entity which gets personhood. But they're still, you can't pinch them and you can't hug them and you can't kiss them. You can't do anything with them. They're just paper. The third is that throughout history, brute power works for a short time. But over the long run, our real humanity, which is compassion, which is solidarity, which is mutuality, that is what creates the future for the next wave. So we've been through these processes before. The technologies might be new, but the intent is the old intent. The new tools of biotechnology might be new, but it's still Hitler. After all, Hitler's lab created the poison cartel, created the chemicals that we use in agriculture. And, the roots of industrial agriculture are in warfare. And it's not an accident that then we see results all around us. And part of that warfare is attack those who work to protect the earth and people.
Andy, what has it been like for you to watch folks like yourself and Vandana get attacked in these routine ways?
I have always thought it was a compliment. They're coming after you because you're effective. They're coming after us because we're winning lawsuits and we're stopping their products. They're coming after us because, not me, but all of our colleagues and ourselves were able to stop an entire WTO attempt to take over the world, the corporate globalization. We've gotten in their way, and so it's always a compliment to me when they come after us. And I always make a distinction between the people who may work in these corporations and the corporations. I mean, people who may work in these corporations have been better fathers than I've been, or better people than I am. And I never do ad hominem, never. I mean, maybe Gates, but I'm talking about, or Dick Cheney. I mean, there are a few exceptions of like really evil people, but the vast majority, to me, it's institutional evil. I've called it cold evil and stuff I've written. It's a very institutionalized, evil. And I think that their dangerous narrative is based on what I call human privilege, which is sort of an unconscious assumption that nature is there for our use, instead of us needing to have a mutually enhancing relationship with all the rest. So the trees are our lungs. We couldn't breathe without the trees, right? So just as Vandana was saying, we're a participant. We're not the master of this. And I think the idea of technology is to try and always convince us, no, we can master it. We can take over. That's sort of the say, because it was made for us. We use the word natural resources, right? What does that mean? That means the whole world is natural resources for us. When they use that term, they don't mean natural resources for the birds or for the whales or for the bees. So even the language we use is in this wrong consciousness. And when those of us come with the other consciousness, and that is, of course, a tremendous threat to their narrative, because our narrative is being, unfortunately, underscored by the horrible things that the industrial system has done to the earth and to ourselves and to humans, not just the rest of the earth. Think of the wars, the exploitation of labor. What it's done to humans is so terrible. I mean, it's terrible.
And I think that's the real issue, that when we realize that we are part of the earth, then we protect the earth and people. And even today, many people are pushing this, I call it ecological apartheid, the separation from nature. And the people who want to get rid of the farmers and get rid of the sheep and get rid of the cows to have a mystical, anonymous nature. And therefore, they are then compelled into the position that instead of meeting our needs in harmony and balance with nature through non-violent relationships, we will have to be more violent and now eat lab food. So they've kind of, this, to me, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos trying to go off to Mars, and people who think they can escape from the ecological systems of which we are a part, it's the same escape mentality.
Well, they could stay in Mars. That would be nice. I mean, you keep them there.
And you can keep, and the ones who are promoting lab food, precision fermentation, they call it. That's why farmers must go. They can live on their lab food, but let the rest of us take care of the earth and let her gift us the food as a gift. And that's how real farming works. And it can feed, I mean, if there's hunger in the world today, it's not because ecological agriculture is unproductive. Our work in Navdanya has shown we can feed 2 times India's population by conserving biodiversity, saving native seeds, doing ecological work. Hunger is there because A, speculation, 2, globalized trade, which robs the peasant of 90% of their income, and even worse, putting 80, 40% for biofuel in terms of corn and soya, and 40% for animal feed. Now that's a guarantee to have hunger. So, if the earth doesn't create hunger.
That's so important. Most Americans don't understand that 50% of our cropland in the United States is devoted to GMO corn and soy that doesn't directly feed anybody. This isn't the kind of corn we eat. This is field corn. It goes into automobiles, it goes into high fructose corn syrup, it goes into these animal factories, these horrific, animal factories that are creating methane, of course, that creates the climate crisis. Same with soy. 50% of our best farmland, which is a catastrophe. And instead of understanding that catastrophe, the Gates and Rockefellers have tried to then export that disastrous model around the world, which pushes people off their land into the Bhopals, into the Brasilias, into the Addis Ababas, where they have to be in these tents, they have to be in these little shacks by the millions because they were no longer food independent. They kicked them off the land for these export crops that have nothing to do with food, coffee, sugar, flowers, water. And so that enclosure of the land away from independent landowners, away from food production to money production commodities is one of the secret histories. I don't know why it's not better told. I mean, Vandana tells it and I've told it, but it is the enclosure movement that is really behind all of this, Vandana, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole house of cards of industrial agriculture and globalized corporate commodity trade would fall if these, I have a book called Who Really Feeds the World, which I was asked to write for the Milan Food Summit, because this was their theme, Who Feeds the World? And they said, will you do a book giving us facts? And of course, 80% of the food comes from small farms. Chemicals don't increase productivity at all. GMOs have had collapse. I mean, the BT cotton case shows collapse of yields. Bill Gates is now the biggest farmland owner of America. He's stealing the land of American farmers. And of course, he wants to steal the land of the Dutch farmers and of the farmers all over the world. Our peasants fought back. That's what the issue was. They said, we want to be peasants. We don't want to be slaves in factories. So I think the issue right now for the future of humanity is the land question, the food question, and the integrity of life question.
And don't be fooled, right, Vandana and Ashley? So you will see certain utopians like, I don't know, Steven Pinker or some of these other people say, we have raised, 100 million people out of poverty. That is not true. What they've done is, you go through Africa and Asia, what they've done is to take people off the land where they did not have a monetary economy. They didn't need it. They were in food independence. They had their own food sovereignty. They were not in a monetary economy. They've taken that land, put it into the monetary commodification economy, taken it out of the food creating, food producing, and all those people that are forced into these cities where they're working for like $2 a day, $1 a day. And then they say, see, they were making no money. And now they're making $1 and $2 a day. We're raising them out of poverty. It is one of the most cynical and evil narratives that you can possibly imagine.
And meantime, they don't let you know that, they had their fresh water, they had good food, they had a livelihood, they had music, they had time, they had embroidery, they carved their beautiful huts. And now they're in a tent, literally. My fear is the whole world in blue plastic in refugee camps all over the world. Well, that's where they are. And they struggle, they earn $1 a day. But life now costs $5 a day. You have to get your water, you have to buy your water, you have to buy your food, you have to buy everything. And so when you shift people with real life and real economies into the monetary economy, you actually create the crisis of living. That's why if you look at the marches around the world, the most common marches today are cost of living marches. Mm-hmm. The cost of living. They keep talking about $1 a day income. The reality is, what does it cost to live? Does it cost $0 because I have my own land? Does it cost $2 because everything is in the public domain, your energy, your education, your health? Or are you going to have to kill yourself literally to live? I mean, what's happening? In my town, in Dehradun, every second day, there's a new giant-sized building, and it's a hospital. Now, who runs the big pharma? It's the same guys who sell the poison. Yeah? They sell the pesticides, give you cancer, then have the patented cancer drug. The same buyers that are now Monsanto push GMOs, push glyphosate, and also have the monopoly on the cancer drugs. And I'm looking at these buildings, and I can see people are selling their land to go and end their lives in these expensive places. And we've created a sickness society, not a healthy society, not a society based on well-being. So we've shifted again to well-being, and that includes in the economic system. I've just done a new book interestingly, for the Italians, and they wanted me to write on the economy of care. So the book is called Greed to Care. And I've basically in that made visible all the amazing creativity that takes place when you start caring for the earth, you start caring for community, you start caring for future generations. Care is what creates. Greed destroys.
I wrote an article 2 or 3 years ago called "Is the Care Economy Stupid?" Right? This is the thing in America. Is the economy stupid? And I said, it's the care economy. And this is right before COVID. COVID has shown if anything, Wall Street, they close up, they're frightened. So who's always going to be there for the land, for families, for people? It's going to be the care economy. It's not going to be the profit economy. It's not people who get up every morning thinking they make more money. It's people who get up every morning to care for something. And, one of the tragedies, Vandana, which you're so much closer to than I, but is that when you are kicked off your land, all that wisdom that's been developed over centuries about how to treat the land, what seeds are there, how all that wisdom is lost in one generation, right? When you're in a city and all that wisdom that's been developed, it is, I was talking to Wendell Berry about this the other day, and he was saying, well, that's what drives him crazy, to think of all this enclosure of the people off their lands. And what's lost is the culture, just as you were saying, everything else. But what's also lost is their wisdom in the land, how their knowledge that's been developed over all those generations, these women and men, about how to treat the land. And so that then creates a huge education issue about when people get back. So there's a lot of repair that needs to be done there. And but I think showing examples as you and Ashley, in Hawaii, all these wonderful things that are going on. People need to know that the alternatives are out there. People are showing it work. Studies are showing that it's small and medium farms that are going to feed the earth, not large farms. And I'm talking Michigan State, we're talking about United Nations. I mean, these are scientific things that people have done to say, listen, the only way you're going to feed the earth is not through the commodity agriculture. It's not about yield per acre, it's about nutrition per acre, it's about feeding people per acre. And so, it's all there. The science is there and the examples are there.
It feels like you guys have been working on this for decades, though. And in some ways, it feels like it's only getting worse. And so I'm wondering, how you maintain as activists and scholars the energy that you have to produce these truth-telling analyses of power as it changes its costume and shows up in a new form. And says, okay, fine. You're not buying the green revolution today. We're selling you X, Y, and Z. Like, how do you maintain the endurance to stay in this work as activists?
If you see the power of the philanthrocapitalists, so the power of the corporations, so the power of the World Bank and IMF, and you realize it's an external power. It's a power through a layer called money. Yeah. And that's external to our human condition. It doesn't make us. It's a false currency in terms of life. I always say the real currency of life is life. It's not money. Money is an artificially created layer. It's not that people didn't interact and didn't have local currencies, but they never gave the money a higher value and reality than the real world, the real soil, the real food. And when Andy was talking about the consciousness, and I know Andy has been very influenced by Indian spirituality and people like Swami Vivekananda. To me, spirituality is a simple recognition that we are part of a beautiful sacred universe. And that sacredness is in us too. And that power, that other form of energy, not the destructive energy, not the death energy, but the creative energy, the living energy is us. We are it. And you don't have to make an effort around it. You just live it. You just let it flow. You don't become blind to your own power.
Our friend Jerry Mander wrote a book called In the Absence of the Sacred. Remember that, Vandana?
Yes.
When you think about the seed doesn't exist in isolation. The seed has this sacred community of soil and water and sun and pollinators and animals that provide the nitrogen. And if it's for humans, food, humans and farmers, right? And that sacred community is, to me, sacred. They asked E.F. Schumacher, what does sacred mean? And he says, if you don't know how it works, it's sacred. And we don't even understand photosynthesis right now. So, for me, we're not required to be successful. And we have been successful. And the organic movement is unbelievably successful here. I never believed, Vandana, that we'd get so much interest in soil. Soil is everywhere. All these groups are joined together on soil. Documentaries are coming out on soil. And by the way, everybody, Seeds of Vandana Shiva is the documentary that just came out. You have to watch this thing. But it's just it's just beautifully made, Vandana. I was very taken with it. But anyway, I don't feel we're required to be successful. That's beyond my pay scale, Ashley. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I know that this is a doomed paradigm, and that if our ecological future doesn't happen, we probably don't have a future. I can probably say that honestly, but I'm not required to be successful. I'm required to be faithful. I'm required to say, here is the sacred community, and I need to be faithful in every way I can. On a good day, it's okay. On a bad day, maybe not so much, but I need to be faithful to defending that. I need to be faithful in understanding more about it. I need to be faithful in being more clever at those who are trying to, opposing those who are trying to destroy it. So to me, it's all about faithfulness, right? Which gives me peace. Success is sort of capitalist. I'm going to win. I'm going to win. That to me is not a serene way to, as I get older, especially. To me, listen, how well am I doing in trying to be faithful to protecting this sacred community, for example? And that's it. And I think Doug Tompkins, our beloved friend Doug Tompkins, right? He always used to say, so what is the marker of human success? What's the marker? And he said, the marker is biodiversity. The marker of whether we're succeeding in the human project or not is how we're doing it, promoting biodiversity or the reverse. So ultimately, I think that's in the beauty and the diversity of creation. And what are we doing to promote that every day and fight those who are pushing through their economies, through their greed, through their ignorance, extinction?
You're so right, Andy. But we don't have to have a guarantee that our actions will give us a future. But we have to have a commitment that they are the right actions for the earth, that community, for people around us. And if we do that right, hopefully enough people will make those little actions. And, when I started to say seed in the face of this patenting and what I call bioimperialism, I said, well, either they'll win and they'll destroy the seed, so we must still save it, or they won't win, so we must still save the seed and do another agriculture. It doesn't matter what the outcome, saving seed is your duty. And I think that is for everything. Doing the right, you don't have to worry about whether you'll fix the entire temperature catastrophe of the planet, but you can plant your trees and you can increase the richness of your soil. And my big worry right now, Andy, because of this net zero in Mr. Gates's book, is he so clearly said that the new market will be of offsets, which means indirectly he's looking at the land of the Indian peasants, the African peasants. And they already, as they say, they've created the plumbing of net zero. I debated these people before Glasgow. And they're already looking at not just monetizing nature, but financializing nature and making her an asset on Wall Street. And again, Rockefeller and Wall Street, New York Stock Exchange, have created this whole new natural asset system. And they're looking at 4,000 trillion as their economy, a fictitious economy. And part of this fictitious economy is making farmers forget that they grow food, that they nourish us, and turning them purely into carbon sinks. And I said, when I was having this debate, I said, please, for us, the soil and land is our mother. It's not your carbon sink for your pollution. And our reverence for our land, our care for the earth, is where the real solutions will come from. And those solutions are not just climate solutions, they're biodiversity regeneration. They're good food. Someone just posted today, don't look towards your doctor if you want help. Look towards your farmer who grows good food. They are the physicians of the future. And so the healthy food, increasing the humus in the soil, not just reductionist carbon, because I think carbon reductionism is a very, very big, it's very easy to take a reductionist category and put it into Wall Street, whereas living systems are not extractable, because living systems work on the whole. And so we must develop communities that work together, earth communities, soil communities, plant communities, and build them inwards to help each other.
That's so, that's what my problem sometimes is, overemphasis. And we're working, obviously on the climate crisis, as you know, because we're doing some work together. But the climate crisis is just a symptom of the extraction pathology. And that extraction pathology is simple to put into words, right? It's the idea, it's the pathology that somehow you can extract elements of nature, forest, nutrition of the soil, fish, you name it. You can extract any water, any faster than it can regenerate. You can't do that. That will lead to scarcity and ultimately extinction and ultimately a dead planet. If you do that with your bank account, if you're just taking more money out, you never put anything into the bank account, people know what happens, right? But it's that simple. And, it's second grade, first grade science. And yet that pathology that we can continue extracting past nature's capacity to regenerate is still out there and is part of this sort of consciousness, fundamental consciousness issue. Because I don't even hear environmental groups say that very often, that we can't extract nature faster than can regenerate itself, that human economy has to be wholly owned subsidiary of ecology and the regenerative capacity of nature. There is no economy without that. That's the only economy, right? Is ecology and regeneration. That's it. End of story. Yes. No argument, right? And it's so obvious. This is not nuanced stuff, Ashley. This is not sort of, having to read, von Hayek and Milton Friedman and figure out arguments about micro and macroeconomics. This is absolutely, basically, empirically true. And yet that's the narrative we've got to be able to get through more and more and more, I think.
So much of what you guys both have in common is this deep commitment to thinking through the complexity of the dominant narratives of power and trying to communicate the false promises of that narrative and stretch people into a belief of the alternative. I'm wondering, what are the mediums that you've used to do that work? How do you convince someone that everything you've been told by the mainstream media, by your economics department, by your environmental NGO that's being funded by a philanthrocapitalist who is greenwashing the technologies of corporate power? How do you convince people that there needs to be a shift? And what are the ways that you do that? Is it public speaking? Is it organizing? Is it book writing?
I don't think our work is convincing others. Our work is to understand where things have got broken and also how we can heal. And then not leave it as a theoretical exercise. At least for me, then you have to be what you want to see, the change you want to see. And that's why I've given all these years to agriculture, to seed saving, because it wasn't just enough to say there shouldn't be patents on seed. We had to have seeds that were not patented. We had to work to change laws or not allow laws of patenting. Our laws, and this is part of our work, that our laws say plants, animals, and humans are not, and seeds are not human inventions. And therefore they cannot be patented. And this happened because we worked again and again with Parliament. I brought John Moore, who had been patented by his own doctor, who sold his Moore cell line to Ciba-Geigy. And, the blood of a cancer patient was patented by his own doctor. I brought him to address Parliament. So Parliament woke up. Percy Smyser, who was sued by Monsanto after Monsanto contaminated his field. So we have to do whatever is our capacity and our reach. So, Andy's a lawyer. He does legal cases. I do my scientific work. I do the practice. We then document what we've done. We work with real people. And I say, just like when I started saving seed, I said, if I can save one seed, that seed is free. And in that seed is freedom. And it doesn't matter what Monsanto owns. This seed is free. And I think that's why this issue of being faithful, that in your sphere of influence, you have to do what is the right thing for everyone in your sphere of influence. And at least in my own life, I have learned that the energy for that is energy that grows with service, with giving. The more you give, the more you have.
Yeah, I mean, that's beautifully put. And when you say that Vandana Shiva walks the talk, that's really impressive because her talk, as you can tell, is amazing. So she also walks that talk is I'm never passive aggressive because I get to sue, right? I get to litigate. And we did get the Supreme Court to say no patenting of DNA. hopefully we're going to get no patenting of cells soon. So, it's not like you never have success, as I was saying before. I don't know, I love detective novels. I loved it. And I'm a sucker for any detective show on television. I always got to know who done it. You got me hooked almost from the beginning. And when I was very young, because I was brought up in a left-wing family, I wasn't satisfied with the ownership of the means of production being the issue, which is what most Marxists were saying, right, Vandana? That didn't work for me. I thought there was murder afoot, and the murdering was the murder of the planet. And I realized that fairly early on. We don't, for Earth Day 1970s, we're going back a long way. This knowledge has been there for a long time. And I wanted to find out who done it and why they're doing it. So part of this, to me, I have to confess, is curiosity. Is I keep thinking of who's doing it, how are they doing it, how can we stop it, what's their ideology? So I find that endlessly fascinating because it's so urgent to find that out and to come up with counter narratives, strategies that we can do to work it. So to me, it has almost that excitement of curiosity, along with, of course, the grief line of the tragedy of what's happening to the planet and the species. So that's the heart chakra, and that's here. But the solar plexus chakra for me is always, okay, how can we do that? Yeah, and that's what I love about this amazing woman. And the seeds of Vandana Shiva, you'll be able to see so much more of that. But I love that about the IFG, the International Forum on Globalization, which is not really that functional right now. But boy, what a group to get together and do that diagnosis and finding the clues and going after it and being amazingly successful. So I find it very exciting in that way. There's murder afoot. We've got to stop it. We've got to stop the serial killer. And we've got to find more and more of what they're doing. So we're like we're like the best detectives in a detective show. Everyone out there you're watching. That's how we work.
So much of what you guys have been saying,
because the converted need to know. Every religion preaches to the congregation, right? That's what we do. And they say, why are you preaching to the congregation? Every religion knows that's the way to grow, because then the congregation gets the better narrative and goes out and spreads it. So yes, I love preaching to the congregation to the extent that I have the capacity and the wisdom to do that. And I know they're going to go out, and I've seen Vandana do that in so many different fora around the world. And boy, everyone gets it. And now they're going out with her message and her understanding. So go ahead, everybody, go out there, please preach to the congregation, because they're the ones that are going to go out and make it happen in the real world.
So much of what you guys have been saying today reflects the themes that have been drawing out as we've been interviewing activists from across different movements. One is the real need to kind of allow yourself the time and space to feel the magnificence of the planet and connect, not just analytically through the medium of science, but also spiritually, and enlist yourself through a reverence to something greater than to you. If you want to call that God, or you want to call that the universe, or you want to call that the planet, or you want to call that our Earth Mother, really deeply feel that. So I'm really appreciating that theme coming up. Another theme that's been coming up in our work is intergenerational struggle. So I wanted to shift and kind of wonder with you guys, how you are onboarding the next generation of activists into your work, and sort of what you see in the next generation that reminds you of your younger selves, and how have you changed in this, 22 years since the battle for Seattle? What is the wisdom of experience given you? Why don't we start with you, Vandana?
Yeah, I think the wisdom of experience definitely tells you when is the right moment to act. That you can't constantly just going around with a banner and, no, because this is an intellectual challenge. It's an ethical challenge. It's definitely an ecological catastrophe we're facing. So we have to, as Andy said so clearly, we have to create the narrative that resonates with people, their lives, the earth of which we are a part. Most of my colleagues in Navdanya are young. Anyway, when I started, all my colleagues were 20, 30, 40 years older than me. So, and most of them are no more. Yeah. A lot of young people are coming, and the entire Navdanya team is young people. Yeah? I'm the oldie. I think, I think in America, there's too much time spent on differences, all kinds of differences, including age. And, there's been times where, like, all the old people, and it's been said also, all the old people about 60 must be finished. And when I was coming back with the COVID lockdown, and on the flight, the New York Times had this article cover page. Now it's time to decide who will live and who will die. And I don't think we can afford to divide ourselves by gender, by race, yes, these are colonial divisions, we must acknowledge them, but we mustn't make them permanent, we must dissolve them, and including the issue of, people of different ages aren't in contest with each other. Yeah? They just have a different role to play at their age. The grandfathers and grandmothers have their role, the parents have their role, the young people have their role. And I said to Greta, when I met her in Paris, I said, I was your age when the Chipko movement started. And today I'm 70. Yeah. So young people get old also. And old people were young once. So I think too much has been made of the age difference, that somehow all of us of our generation had no ecological awareness, we were just dumb and irresponsible. And I think that is not right, Our generation, Andy, me, we've done a lot of work, intellectual work, political work, as a gift to the future generations.
Mm. Yeah, I have, the only thing I would add to that is I have two kids who are, one is definitely a millennial, the other's on the actually verge of millennial. And, I just totally agree with everything Vandana said. Remember, the first Earth Day was 1970. The first is Walter Cronkite in 1974 talked about climate crisis on CBS News. Right? The first use of the word terracide, meaning the killing of the planet by corporations, was used by a Christian magazine in 1975. Yeah. So this has been around for a long time, these ideas. And the problem is the corporations and those that still profit from the killing of the earth, and they did then and they do now. So to the extent that we lose our focus, or too much of our focus on other things and not the destruction of the planet, there is no justice on a dead planet. There is no equity on a judged planet. There's no diversity on a judged planet. There's no, there's no Gandhi. There's no Vedanta. There's no spirituality. There's no Mozart. There's no jazz. And for me, there's no baseball. These things are not there on a dead planet. So it has to care. I understand the care and protection and participation, rather than domination of the planet, has to be number one for any generation. Any generation. There is no, I don't see any way out of that, Ashley, and to the extent, so that's why it has to be mission critical. Everything else is important, goodness knows. We know about white privilege, and we know about the issues that we're facing with racism, and they're terribly important. But for those of us who are doing this work, it has to be that human privilege I was talking about earlier, that assumption that nature was made for our gain and to have an entire economic, technological system based on that. That's what's destroying the planet. So that's the privilege that I'm concentrating on. And I know young people will too. I think so many young people out there would rather be Earth citizens than the citizens of their country. I think they would embrace that. They're so tired of old people nationalism, Modi and Trump and Orban and Balasar. They're tired of that. I think they're ready to embrace the planet. They just need the narrative. They just need some of the things that maybe this older generation we can still provide. Because, by the way, Vandana, we're not getting older, are we? Nobody told me. We're not getting older, are we? I don't think we're getting older, are we?
No, we are young in mind and we're young in heart. And I think we're even young in body, just that when you measure it by age, time has passed.
Yeah, we're not going to let age be a cage.
Time has passed.
No.
Well, I hear you, and you both have offered really open and diplomatic and thoughtful responses. And yet you are also touching on a sense, and we would imagine that the folks tuning into this podcast, if they're to this episode in the series, we had a Baltimore Velasquez on yesterday. He's a farm worker, labor organizer, and he tells the story of trying to organize the farm workers in his community in the 1970s in Ohio. And he was the first of his community to go to college. He comes back from college, he's organizing, and the farm worker's like, this fucking kid, I'm not going to listen to him. He's idealistic. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And he realizes in this moment that he's not going to be taken seriously because he's young. And I'm just, and he goes along to organize his father, and his father kind of gets on board, and his father organizes his friends, and they ultimately engage in an 8-year struggle to give the migrant farm workers in his community rights for the first time. And it reminds me of my own experience of my dad being like, oh, she went off to college and she came home a socialist, and she has these wild and crazy ideas. I wonder,
Ashley, let me get in here really fast, because we first of all, we want to not burden Vandana too much longer, I think, but I just want to quickly.
Yeah, because it's late. It's late for me.
I know it's late for you. I've been thinking about it for the last half hour, Vandana. I can see it's late for you. I just want to say that when we were young, we helped stop a war as an act of conscience. We were young. The older people thought we were crazy. I remember that. I haven't forgotten that. Now, of course, don't get me wrong. The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong had something to do with it. I'm not saying but they would admit that the anti-war movement, which is not entirely, but to a great extent, a movement of young people. There was some David Dillinger. There was wonderful older people too, by the way, who were wonderful in that, but it was mostly young people. If you look at the people that died fighting for the civil rights, they were young. They were fighting the older people. The feminist movement, the environmental movement.
Martin Luther King was 26. It's like
everybody was young. So I certainly don't need to be told by anybody that the young people can get the job done and can do amazing historical changes, because I lived it. I was arrested. I fought through it, and so as many of my colleagues have. So we know that. So I would reverse the challenge. I would say, okay, that's some of the history that many of us share. So, millennials, how's it going with you? What are your initiation rites? How are you going to go even further in this? So I'm going to reverse the challenge on you, Ashley, and others, saying, yeah, listen, a lot of old people they weren't, maybe your dad, maybe not, weren't part of it, but we were part of it. I was part of it. And I'm very, very proud of the part that I took and have taken all these years. So, hey, you activists, spiritually minded, progressive, wonderful people of a younger age, I'm here to help. I'm here to facilitate if I can. Where are you going with all this? Because every one of those things needs to be continued.
Vandana, tell me, can you offer us like a story of intergenerational hope and solidarity where folks are coming together to affect change?
Well, I think on every big movement of our time, of course. Climate change is not just a young people movement, it's an old people movement. Just today, James Lovelock, who as a NASA scientist had the courage to save the earth is living, and Kate Walter Gaia, he just passed away on his 103rd birthday. And, this whole story, like Andy talked, these are not the catastrophes that we are experiencing are new, but the knowledge that this would happen is not new. And other ages have had other issues. I was a very young woman when I became a volunteer with the Chipko movement, and we made big changes. And I think Andrew talked about Earth citizenship, and I've written a book called Earth Democracy, saying our first citizenship is of the Earth. And the Earth makes us equal but diverse, yeah? We in India have to get a bit pigmented because that's how we live in a tropical climate. And you all have less pigmentation. But the color of the skin is such a superficial identity. And it was only made big because of colonialism and slavery. Without it, before that, trade was there, but there was no issues of hatred for, the Africans would come to India, the Indians would go to the Arab world. We were moving around, and there was never the issue of racism. It was invented as part of colonialism. And, I was during an election in Italy, I was invited to a whole radio talk, and people were starting, I'm talking about 15 years ago, the whole neoliberal ideology was being put into place. And one element of it was they were saying there's a conflict between the young people and the old people. And then they were trying to dismantle the pension system on the basis of which the young people of Italy were surviving because there were no jobs. So very often, the exaggeration of a conflict and competition between the ages is a construct, because it's an element of what I call the divide and rule policy. And I think we have to celebrate all colors, all genders, all religions, and all ages, and celebrate them with our common humanity. And the fact that life takes us through these various stages, and there's no fixed, there's no fixed age, that you will be a revolutionary at 25. No, you can be a revolutionary at 75. And it depends on your circumstances. It depends on the world in which you are. And, the anti-war movement, for sure. I think if we could bring the spirit of the anti-war movement and contemporary ecological issues, recognizing that this is a war against the earth. Mm-hmm. And just like, one country, Vietnam, so many countries are going through war, but all countries are having to live through a war against the earth and people being driven into blue plastic tents. And we can live better, and we have to become much more creative and much more innovative in terms of how we bring people who have been divided together. The work I've done is, consumers and producers were pitted against each other. The farmers were told, no, you can't have a higher price because the consumers want a lower price. And no, the consumers were paying a high price anyway because the middlemen were taking it over. And the consumers were being told, the reason the price is high is because the farmers are getting a lot more. And we exposed all those lies, and we put together the farmers and producers in food communities, and they know each other directly, and they respect each other. So every divide and rule has to be transcended in our higher unity and a higher humanity.
Amen to that. And I would also, actually, I would be double amen to that. And I would have to note that the vast majority of people who work for the Center for Food Safety are young people. And they are in their hero's journey right now, staying up all night to do law briefs, getting the message out, working as hard as they can, and sometimes very heroically, to take on Bayer Monsanto, to get the word out, and really to finally end this catastrophic industrial agriculture zombie paradigm. And they know that's what we're about, and they're fighting it like crazy. So I don't need some complicated story of intergenerational. The story is what I live every day with incredible colleagues at CFS, and inspired by their work and their professional development, which gives me great joy.
I think that's a great way to end. Vandana, thank you for your middle of the night musings. We appreciate you even in your dream space.
Well, lovely to see you, and lovely to see you, Andy. And
a blessing as always to be in your presence, Vandana. My only regret is that we don't have more, but maybe after COVID thing, we can find wonderful ways to once again be in, not just working together, but actually be in each other's presence. I look
forward to that. I hope it'll work next year.
Joy for me.